On December 16, 1944, dawn broke over Mona, Germany, where the icy ground quivered beneath yet another barrage of U.S. artillery rounds whistling through the sky. Yet this dawn carried an eerie novelty. In a horrifying and baffling twist, those projectiles avoided crashing into the soil or foliage. Instead, they burst suspended in the air right over the pushing German lines, unleashing a deadly shower of shrapnel that rendered foxholes utterly useless. Within the ranks of the 326th Volk Grenadier Division, charging the 38th Cavalry Squadron's defenses, troops hardened by years on the Eastern Front now faced a phenomenon that shattered their grasp of combat. These weren't the familiar shelling rhythms, the expected strikes, the reliable havens, the shielding power of dugouts. This marked demise inflicted from the heavens with calculated exactness. In that instant, Colonel Oscar Alfred Axelson from the 406th Artillery Group executed one of the Battle of the Bulge's pivotal unsanctioned choices. Defying explicit directives and bypassing approval from superiors, he instructed his crews to arm their weapons with the Allies' most tightly held innovation, proximity fuses. These mechanisms, incorporating compact radar units to gauge proximity to objectives and explode at ideal elevations, amplified the destructive force of cannon fire by up to 50 times. The calculus of destruction stood poised for a profound shift amid the chilled woods of the Ardennes. Unbeknownst to the advancing Germans, they had just clashed with an invention so groundbreaking that it would reshape not only this clash, but the essence of military conflict forever. The onslaught erupted. Operation Watch on the Rhine launched with soaring optimism for the Wehrmacht. The Führer's desperate wager mobilized 200,000 troops, 1,000 armored vehicles, and close to 2,000 guns, all concealed in the misty Ardennes. Hitler had convinced his commanders that the push would divide the enemy coalitions and seize Antwerp, reversing a conflict drifting relentlessly toward collapse. The opening volley at 05:30 hours on December 16th secured total operational shock. German batteries unleashed 1,600 projectiles per minute across the 85-mile line. U.S. reconnaissance had collapsed disastrously. It overlooked the enormous concentration, leaving many forward posts manned by novice fillers or weary fighters rotated to this dormant zone for recovery. But in Mancha, Colonel Axelson confronted a dire battlefield bind. The 38th Cavalry Squadron, a modest scouting outfit, buckled under the heavier Teutonic onslaught. Standard barrages proved powerless to halt the advance. In a bold stroke of urgency, Axelson issued his landmark command: unleash the classified proximity-fused rounds sans clearance. He risked court-martial in the aftermath for this move, yet right then, he saw that rigid obedience spelled inevitable loss. The impact struck swiftly and ruinously. Germans pressing forward in classic attack patterns abruptly endured a barrage unlike any before. The rounds detonated 30 to 50 feet overhead. Every blast generated a widening spray of debris, blanketing far greater expanses than typical surface impacts. Battle-scarred fighters, skilled at dodging routine shelling, perished in their burrows, shielded by trunks, in gullies, any refuge they claimed, the hidden ingenuity of annihilation. The proximity fuse embodied the pinnacle of U.S. technological ingenuity and manufacturing prowess. Distinct from impact-dependent rounds or timed detonators prone to faulty altitudes, this fuse housed an autonomous radar setup scarcely bigger than a coffee tin. Within every unit, U.S. designers crammed 130 electronic parts, including 4 or 5 tiny vacuum tubes per variant, engineered to endure the staggering 20,000 G-forces of launch from a howitzer. The underlying science boggled the mind. Upon discharge, the surge would shatter a glass vial of electrolyte, forming a power source to activate the minuscule radar throughout the projectile's trajectory. Dr. Merle Tuve, leading efforts at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, propelled this breakthrough with fervor rivaling the Manhattan Project. The facility, masked as a derelict auto lot in Silver Spring, Maryland, drew 3% of the nation's physicists during its height. Safeguards equaled those of the nuclear initiative. Staff remained silent about their roles, even at home, and every fuse bore a distinct serial for monitoring. The engineering hurdles appeared daunting. Radio-style vacuum tubes needed total overhaul to withstand cannon blasts. They required operation amid furious spins across diverse climates and precision to sense objects without early mishaps with premature explosions were overcome by innovative miniaturization methods that would eventually transform the field of electronics. The devices developed by Dr. James Van Allen were scarcely bigger than pencil erasers, but they incorporated every key feature of standard radio vacuum tubes. Come December 1944, U.S. manufacturing plants were churning out 40,000 proximity fuses each day. More than 100 firms pitched in, ranging from RCA and General Electric to Sylvania and Crossley Corporation. The initiative's total expense hit $1 billion in 1940s currency, making it the second-largest wartime outlay after only the Manhattan Project. Crisis in approval and swift rollout. Axelson's unsanctioned deployment on December 16th sparked an urgent leadership dilemma. He had defied explicit directives limiting proximity fuses to anti-aircraft roles, worried that seized units could be dissected and copied by German engineers. Yet the overwhelming success at Mona was impossible to ignore. The enemy offensive had ground to a halt, inflicting losses that stunned everyone involved. News of the fuse's power quickly made its way to Supreme Headquarters. Seeing the dire circumstances unfolding in the Ardennes, General Eisenhower sought official permission on December 19th. By December 21st, all limitations were removed, allowing proximity fuses for unrestricted ground warfare throughout the Bulge theater. The ensuing fast-paced supply chain highlighted U.S. logistical prowess. In mere days, shells fitted with these fuses reached artillery groups across the Ardennes. The 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion in Bastogne got their share right as the German encirclement tightened around the settlement. The Forward 20th Armored Field Artillery Battalion, operating M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers, started deploying them to protect the northwestern routes. The 969th Artillery Battalion, led by Lieutenant Colonel Hubert D. Barnes and composed of African-American troops, unleashed them with ruinous impact to the southwest of Bastogne. Every group learned the identical lesson. Proximity fuses elevated artillery from mere backup to a game-changing force on the field. Spotters didn't have to fine-tune barrages anymore. The fuses handled their own ideal burst timing. Precision demands dropped sharply as destructive power surged dramatically. Bastogne, encircled yet unmatched. The standoff at Bastogne offered an ideal showcase for proximity fuses in holding actions. The 101st Airborne Division, fully cut off and outmanned, clung to the crucial intersection amid relentless German pushes. Their fire support featured the 403rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, armed with 75mm pack howitzers that could launch proximity-fused projectiles. From December 19th through 31st, the 463rd unleashed precisely 7,976 shells per official logs. Though not everyone carried the new fuses owing to shortages, those that did wrought havoc on morale and flesh alike. Enemy attack groups disintegrated beneath the overhead explosions, wiping out whole platoons in moments. The assault on December 22nd, coming right after General McAuliffe's legendary nuts retort to the German ultimatum, highlighted the fuse's potency. German foot soldiers pressing forward over snowy terrain and classic lines were exposed in the clear. The shells burst high above at exact intervals, forming interlocking kill zones with no escape. The entirely African-American 969th Artillery Battalion proved just as vital. Their 155mm howitzers forged an unbreakable barrier of annihilation around Bastogne's edges that the Germans couldn't breach. The bigger rounds, erupting at 50 feet, showered even wider swaths with deadly shrapnel. Captured Germans afterward described how advancing squads broke apart well short of U.S. positions, with troops scattering from the baffling aerial detonations. The Aar River Massacre. The most meticulously recorded display of proximity-fused deadliness took place along the Aar River close to Edelbrook from December 25th to 26th. General George S. Patton, whose Third Army was pushing northward to rescue Bastogne, observed the clash firsthand and detailed it in his book, War as I Knew It. A German battalion trying to ford the half-frozen waterway figured the night and mist concealed them from U.S. spotters. Conventional barrages would have demanded precise calibration, buying the Germans moments to finish the transit or hunker down, but proximity-fused rounds required none of that. Patton noted, "We caught a German battalion crossing the hour. The new proximity ammo was devastating. The shells burst in the air above them. They had nowhere to run. The river behind them, our fire in front and above. When the firing stopped, we counted 702 bodies. That tally, 702 fatalities verified by direct count, stands as one of the rare exact casualty counts tied to proximity fuse action. The sheer computational brutality was chilling. A lone battalion Assanti entire units were obliterated in mere moments, leaving soldiers with no chance to flee or find cover. The mental toll rippled across German troops in the area, leading many to defy commands for advancing over the river. Combat in wooded areas was forever altered. The thick woods of the Ardennes, which the Germans had relied on for hiding, turned into fatal ambushes once proximity fuses came into play. In exposed fields, a fuse exploding at 30 to 50 feet was already devastating. Yet in dense timber, the destruction amplified dramatically. The overhead blasts snapped off limbs from trees, generating countless extra wooden shards. These jagged pieces, often as lengthy as a person's forearm, hurtled forward at speeds of hundreds of feet per second, proving deadly on impact. Conventional shelter tactics, hunkering behind thick trunks or scooping out pits beneath root networks, lost all value. The debris rained down from overhead, overturning ages-old strategies for battling in forests. U.S. artillery teams swiftly grasped this amplifying power. Just one 155 mm round with a proximity fuse, bursting high in the treetops, could wipe out everything alive across an expanse roughly the size of a tennis court. The mix of shrapnel from the projectile and timber fragments from the foliage formed a full-circle death radius that no level of battlefield cunning could dodge. Troops schooled in woodland tactics discovered their knowledge rendered obsolete. Dispersing to minimize clustered losses exposed groups to the broad-reaching blasts. Clustering for shared protection risked wiping out whole platoons with a lone shot. No effective maneuver existed against this emerging danger, a display of technological edge at work. The proximity fuse relied on concepts that struck 1940s fighters as straight out of fantasy. Inside each one sat a miniature radio broadcaster tuned to 180 to 220 MHz, emitting signals non-stop that bounced back from nearby items like earth, foliage, machinery, or people. As the projectile neared its mark, the echo grew stronger. Upon hitting a preset strength linked to the best explosion altitude, a circuit flipped to set off the charge. The setup had to endure extremes that would wreck ordinary gear. On launch, forces hit 20,000 times gravity's pull, sufficient to squash a body to dust. The rounds rotated fast enough to unleash enormous spinning pressures. Heat swung from the cannon's 311° F blaze to freezing highs in the arc. Still, the fragile tubes, shielded by clever padding, held up and performed with better than 80% success. Ideal detonation levels came from rigorous trials at the Aberdeen test site using 105 mm guns. For the typical brigade cannon, 30 feet worked best. The 155 mm pieces peaked in deadliness at 50 feet. Scarce 240-meter rounds unleashed havoc at over 70 feet, able to erase whole map sections of foes. Such tech advantage yielded clear control on the ground. Analyses revealed these fuses boosted killing power by 5 to 10 times compared to standard ammo. The danger zone for fragments grew by a multiple of 50. In air defense roles, gains were even starker. Downing V1 buzz bombs jumped from 17% to 79% effectiveness soon after rollout. Spy blunders and enemy disarray. The Germans' intel oversight on proximity fuses spelled disaster. Back in December 1944, Wehrmacht troops seized a U.S. ammo storage site, grabbing around 20,000 such fused rounds. This haul ought to have sparked urgent defenses. Rather, their specialists inspected the prizes and dismissed them as unfeasible. Vacuum tubes in a shell clashed with what German techs knew about circuits and trajectories. They figured the U.S. side employed magnetic sensing or that the scene parts masked the true setup. This misstep arose in part from rigid mindsets. In truth, Germany had pioneered such fuses pre-war. Firms like Rheinmetall Borsig and AEG in Berlin had viable models by 1940, but an edict from Hitler axed any armaments needing over 6 months to deploy, killing the effort. German innovators struggled to accept that Americans cracked challenges they'd ditched. The twist grew when eyeing Teutonic prowess. Their electric versions hit 95% dependability in trials via capacitance shifts instead of radar waves. If pursued, they could have deployed by 1941. Hermann Göring confessed in post-war questioning that their fuses were merely 3 or 4 months from rollout at the conflict's close. The Yuletide disaster. On December 25, 1944, there was no festive pause for German forces trying to leverage the holiday for restocking. Investigations into reorganizations revealed that proximity fuses ignored all truces. Mobile field kitchens, logistics columns, and staging zones faced relentless barrages that didn't require spotters ahead. Just the 420th Armored Field Artillery Battalion unleashed more than 1,000 shells on Christmas Day, with the majority using proximity fuses. Their M7 Priest self-propelled guns unleashed swift, precise barrages that left German forces utterly surprised. The capacity to deliver potent strikes without spotting in adverse conditions at night shifted artillery from a daytime tool to a constant peril around the clock. The mental toll was profound. German troops had grown accustomed to advancing in bad weather, safe from Allied planes that couldn't operate and observers who couldn't detect them. But proximity fuses erased that safe haven. Fatality could strike any time, under any skies, with only the short screech of approaching projectiles as notice. Malmi and Scorzani's elite. On December 21st, SS Colonel Otto Scorzani's crack commandos tried to seize Malmedy. These weren't typical fighters, but hand-picked specialists who had liberated Mussolini, almost nabbed Tito, and slipped behind American positions in U.S. garb. They embodied Germany's finest available warriors. Instead, they encountered ruinous fire from proximity-fused rounds that turned their Yankee outfits from clever ploys into fatal raps. The projectiles burst above with eerie accuracy, seeming to sense the infiltrators beneath. Though precise death tolls are still debated, the assault collapsed disastrously, suffering massive casualties that halted Scorsese's push. The mental collapse among these top-tier SS members was especially telling. These fighters, steeped in notions of Aryan dominance and drilled to peak levels, felt powerless against U.S. ingenuity. Certain survivors allegedly rushed straight at American positions, choosing swift ends over the endless shelling, a total unraveling of order in Hitler's fiercest units. Industrial triumph, the manufacturing feat fueling proximity fuses, rivaled any industrial feat of the war. By December 1944, more than 100 U.S. firms had switched to making the devices. The Crosley Corporation ditched fridge assembly for fuse work. Emerson Radio shifted from consumer gadgets to armaments. Sylvania, RCA, and General Electric committed whole plants to the initiative. Standards of quality control surpassed prior efforts in large-scale output. All 130 parts got separate checks. Each weld was examined through lenses. Select batches were even test-fired to confirm durability in battle. The discard rate was merciless. Any part with minor flaws got tossed. The mainly female staff upheld this exactness amid 12-hour days, 6 times weekly. Security silos kept them in the dark about the product's nature. They just understood its crucial role in the fight. By December 1944, output hit 1 proximity fuse every 2 seconds non-stop. The price drop was astounding. Back in 1942, a single fuse ran $732, exceeding a laborer's yearly pay. By December 1944, scaled-up methods slashed it to $18 each, without skimping on standards. Such thrift enabled 22 million fuses built wartime, including 200s used solely in the Battle of the Bulge. Patton's calculations. General Patton grasped the worth of proximity fuses more keenly than most leaders, likely. His Third Army, pushing to aid Bastonia, treated them as a game-changer for advances. His top gunner, Brigadier General Edward Williams, crafted fresh strategies tailored to these fuses. Williams innovated the time-on-target barrage with proximity fuses. Various units blasted at once, sinking impacts. When scores of these fused shells went off together at ideal altitude, the devastation was cataclysmic. Germans dubbed it the death knell. From December 22nd through 29th, Patton's Third Army loosed 50,000 proximity-fused rounds. The outcomes proved pivotal in shattering German defenses and clearing the path to Bastonia. Patton noted personally, "The funny fuse won the Battle of the Bulge for us. Elsenborn Ridge upholds the Battle of Elsenborn Ridge, showcase proximity, fuses peak power." There, the 2nd and 99th Infantry Divisions clung to vital ground versus the 6th SS Panzer Army, featuring the premier 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. Across 3 days, December 17th to 19th, U.S. guns hurled 160,000 shells, roughly 40,000 proximity fused. This 25% slice caused about 60% of the over 5,000 German losses. The numbers spoke clearly. Proximity fuses amplified U.S. artillery output fourfold. The German assaults struck again and again along the rugged woodland slopes. Steep forested hillsides encountered barriers of exploding shrapnel and metal. Whole units vanished in mere moments, corpses stacked so densely that later assaults required troops to scramble across the remains of their comrades. Following 3 days of onslaughts, the barrages halted. The Krak-Waffen SS divisions had been shattered by U.S. innovations, Operation Bodenplatte's downfall. On January 1, 1945, the Luftwaffe initiated Operation Bodenplatte, sending 900 fighters against Allied bases. The assault achieved total surprise, with numerous enemy planes grounded and vulnerable. However, inbound German aviators faced curtains of proximity-fused flak bursts. Out of 277 German planes down that day, 172 succumbed to anti-aircraft barrages, the majority employing proximity fuses. The destruction ratio astonished participants on both sides. Pilots drilled to dodge anticipated flak barrages discovered explosives bursting exactly at points of greatest harm. The Luftwaffe, previously weakened, could not rebound from such devastation. Unveiling the mystery. By the start of January 1945, upholding confidentiality proved unfeasible. Far too many rounds had been discharged. Far too many troops had observed their devastating results. On January 6th, the War Department permitted restricted revelations. The New York Times covered a novel artillery projectile that amplified the potency of U.S. cannons without detailing the mechanism. German spies only belatedly comprehended the device's importance. A January 10th dispatch from Foreign Armies West noted, "The Americans hold a radio-guided artillery detonator that triggers rounds at ideal altitude for infantry devastation. This device has inflicted heavy losses on our units in the Ardennes. No viable defenses are available." Strategic evaluation. After the conflict, studies confirmed the proximity fuse's pivotal role. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt remarked, "The proximity fuse proved critical. Our assaults collapsed not due to Yankee valor, although they battled fiercely, but owing to cannons that appeared to see." General Hasso von Manteuffel, commander of the 5th Panzer Army, declared, "U.S. artillery instilled dread in our ranks, particularly the innovative rounds that burst overhead. They sparked chaos even in seasoned formations." The figures paint a vivid picture. Some 200,000 proximity-fused projectiles were unleashed, responsible for roughly 15,000 to 20,000 German deaths, potentially 20% of overall German tolls. The device delivered 5 to 10 times the impact of standard shells, all without needing spotters amid foul conditions. The toll on lives. Beneath each number hid profound suffering. German fighters, including numerous adolescents drafted in the conflict's closing phase, perished through means unimaginable in prior conflicts. They fell to devices that appeared to track them intelligently, no matter their cover. U.S. manufacturing staff endured their own hardships. Plant mishaps were concealed for secrecy. Employees at firms like Crosley Corporation and Emerson Radio endured collapses from fatigue and pressure. They crafted arms of extraordinary deadliness, unaware of their purpose, bearing that weight under mandatory quiet. Still, warfare's ethical balance remains complex. The Ardennes campaign claimed 19,000 American fatalities. Absent proximity fuses, what additional deaths might have occurred? How extended might the fighting have dragged on? How many additional Holocaust sufferers would have succumbed as clashes continued? Each day the war was curtailed, likely spared thousands in camps pending rescue. Enduring innovations. The Proximity Fuse initiative sparked breakthroughs that reshaped civilian tech afterward. The compact vacuum tubes laid groundwork for contemporary circuitry. Rigorous quality protocols developed for fuse assembly set benchmarks across sectors. Coordination tactics linking myriad vendors foreshadowed today's logistics networks. Dr. James Van Allen leveraged his downsizing skills for orbital tools. He subsequently identified Earth's radiation zones. Radar techniques advanced into current setups. Ideas of self-reliant detectors rendering judgments formed the basis for homing projectiles and, ultimately, all intelligent armaments. Today's pinpoint munitions trace their roots to the Proximity Fuse, the inaugural armament able to perceive its surroundings and select its explosion timing. The shift sparked in the Ardennes persists on contemporary fields where clever weapons rule combat, ultimate judgment. The Ardennes offensive concluded on January 25, 1945, with Axis troops withdrawing completely. Hitler's final push exacted about 100,000 German casualties for zero gains. U.S. tolls reached 75,000, encompassing 19,000 dead. The Proximity Fuse emerged not only as an armament, but as a conflict decider. General Eisenhower's view that Axis control of proximity fuses could have rendered D-Day profoundly challenging, maybe unfeasible, highlights their tactical weight. They transcended mere cannon upgrades, representing a transformative breakthrough that shifted the tide, fundamentally altered the equation of combat. The Wehrmacht troops confronting shells equipped with proximity fuses encountered an entirely novel phenomenon. Lethal rounds that appeared to possess awareness, zeroing in on their positions no matter where they hid, and converting the atmosphere itself into a zone of destruction. This ordeal signaled the shift of armed conflict into the era dominated by technology. Beginning with Colonel Axelson's unsanctioned initial deployment on December 16, 1944, and extending to the widespread firing of 200,000 such rounds throughout the Ardennes, these fuses illustrated how breakthroughs in science could deliver a game-changing edge on the battlefield. The fusion of U.S. manufacturing prowess, intellectual brilliance, and strategic flexibility yielded a device that played a pivotal role in deciding the conflict's result. At its core, the narrative of the proximity fuse revolves around profound shifts in technology, strategy, and the human element. It underscored that a democratic industrial system was capable of forging arms of extraordinary destructive power, that ingenuity could counterbalance shortages in manpower, and that the faction boasting advanced knowledge stood the best chance of victory. Such insights influenced not only the final phases of World War II, but also the foundational framework of military operations ever since. Amid the icy woodlands of the Ardennes, the epic of tech-driven warfare fully emerged. The calculus of mortality was upended by minuscule radar components embedded in cannon projectiles, permanently reshaping the manner in which people conduct hostilities. Those German fighters who perished under the detonations of proximity-fused bursts above them were victims not merely of one engagement, but of a sweeping upheaval in the domain of armed forces, one that still molds our contemporary reality.